Welcome back to Face the Nation. The American consumer is the engine of the U.S. economy, and we're now officially in peak holiday shopping. We are joined now by Dave Clark. He's the CEO of Amazon's worldwide consumer business. Mr. Clark, good morning to you.
Good morning.
From where you sit, what can you tell us? Is price inflation eating into holiday spending? What do you expect this season?
Well, we're right in the middle of what we call Turkey 5, which is between Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday, and we're off to a great start. We had a record-breaking Black Friday, and we're seeing customers engage. It's really interesting to see how customers are spending in this first post-vaccine holiday as we start to come back together. And as you might expect, consumers are spending on things like apparel. We're seeing a lot of uptick in denim and dresses. We're seeing a lot of things like home decor, particularly in our holiday decor, which is showing that I think families and friends are preparing to come back together as they just did at Thanksgiving and plan to do in the Christmas holidays. We continue to see spend on things like toys. Lots of kids are going to have a good visit from Santa this holiday season, I suspect, as we continue to support there. And a little bit of downturn in electronics as people have spent so much during COVID supporting their home office and various electronic spend. But off to a very good start. I don't see inflation particularly impacting consumers this holiday season so far, and we're very optimistic about what's to come.
Not impacting consumers. Let me ask you about the pandemic then. The White House has blamed the Delta variant for adding to shipping delays. Given this developing news about a new variant that's circulating, I'm wondering what you think the impact on business might be here.
Well, I think as we've heard throughout the morning, it's very early in the process of understanding what's happening with the new variant. And I, for one, am incredibly optimistic around what the scientists and these companies that have supported us with these miraculous vaccines are going to do. And I think consumers are going to wait and see in terms of what happens with that, but are going to move on with their lives into this holiday season. And I think we're going to continue to see people are definitely going towards deals, and considered spend is what they evaluate for this holiday. Particularly as they come back together with their family and friends. People want to have a very thoughtful holiday season and want to, prepare themselves to go back out into the world, if you will. And that's what we're seeing in their spend. But we are optimistic about what's ahead and what's ahead in 22.
You said miraculous vaccines. Are you going to change your company's policy and require vaccination of employees?
Well, we've been in a really good position throughout the pandemic where we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars investing in laboratory equipment to be able to test our teams weekly for whoever wants to be tested. And we've been promoting vaccine clinics. We've done over 1,800 on-site vaccine clinics at our own facilities to get our folks vaccinated. So we're incentivizing, we're trying to make it easier to do, we're educating our teams. We're not planning to move to mandates as we sit today, but we think we have a very good balance of activity in place. We do think vaccines is the way out of this pandemic, and we continue to work with our teams to incentivize them and help them understand why it's so important and get them vaccinated.
Amazon said during its earnings that it was labor that was a big constraint for you. If you pay $15 an hour as the starting wage, $18 an hour average pay, why are you short on workers?
Well, we're having great success hiring, but it is a challenge. We actually onboarded 45,000 people last week. So we are hiring a lot of people, and people continue to be attracted to the great offer we have in pay, which, as you said, is $18 on average, and lots of hiring incentives that are kind of unprecedented, really, at these sort of $3,000 sign-on bonuses, lots of extra hourly incentives. But labor across the U.S., particularly in metropolitan areas, has been very tight this season. And I know when I talk to, while we've had success and it continues to be a challenge, and there are certain areas of the country where it's certainly harder to fill than others. I hear from small business every day about how challenging it is for them to fill their roles.
Why?
Well, I think it's just because people are looking at their lives so differently through the course of the pandemic. I don't think there's a silver bullet. There's a lot of different reasons, but people have evaluated, what kind of jobs do they want to have? Do they want to be in the food service business? Do they want to be in retail? Do they want to be in fulfillment? Do both people in the family want to work? What's the life structure and setup? So many things have changed for people during the course of the pandemic that it's hard to say one particular thing. We're proud of the offering we have for employees, and we're finding success with it. As I said, hiring over 40,000 people a week for the next few weeks. But it's a challenge.
In the April letter to shareholders, Jeff Bezos acknowledged, though, that Amazon needs to do a better job for employees. When I looked at your website, it says sick leaves available based on local laws. It said most leaves are unpaid except pregnancy and parental leaves. If someone gets COVID and they have to be out of work, do they get fired? What kind of guarantees do they have?
Well, first, I would say I think we have among the best benefits in the world for our hourly employees. The employees working in our fulfillment centers have exactly the same benefits as I do. And we offer a maternity leave and paternity leave in a way that most people at those levels don't have access to. We have
so
throughout
you don't
the
want a
pandemic
federal
also
mandate
offered.
For that?
Well, I think it could be very interesting to see what that could do for the country. I worry about what that means for small businesses. We have the capability and the resources at our scale to do a lot of good for our employees that can be more challenging for small and medium-sized businesses. And I think that's where most of the concern you hear with that lies.
Dave Clark, good to talk to you. Thank you for making time today. We'll be right back. We return now to our conversation with Dr. Anthony Fauci about mistakes made, lessons learned, and whether we'll ever crack the mysterious case of COVID's origin. I want to tick through some of these to see if you agree with some of the criticisms of the public health response. The U.S. didn't have a national surveillance system. Testing was inadequate, and there was a lack of data.
Right.
You agree with that?
Yes.
It was a deadly mistake by the CDC to try to use the flu as a model, according to Dr. Deborah Birx. It meant doctors were looking for spread in the wrong places and did not recognize the possibility of asymptomatic spread.
The idea about not recognizing that it was spread in a very efficient way in an asymptomatic situation was really a problem, because what it did not allow a testing of the asymptomatic individuals.
And the flu model being used, why was it used?
The CDC would do that, and that's the way they looked at respiratory diseases. And it took a while to figure out that this is really, really different from flu in many respects.
When did you realize that?
Well, Debbie Birx and I realized that right in the middle of 2020. It was very, very clear. If you go back on some of the statements I made at some of those White House press conferences, we need to flood the system with testing, which means not just somebody who shows up with symptoms.
We look back at statements, and in February of 2020, very early on there, you were still saying it's certainly a possibility, but it's extraordinarily unlikely that COVID was spreading in the U.S.
And that's because we didn't know it at the time.
Why did you have that blind spot?
Well, it wasn't a blind spot because we weren't testing. That was the point. And influenza-like illnesses are not noticed unless you get an influenza-like symptom. The asymptomatic model, that when you have a disease in which you have 30 to 40% of the people who get infected have no symptoms, then you say transmissibility. That was unprecedented in respiratory illness. So I guess you could say, well, you should have known that. The CDC should have known that. But they couldn't have known it from day one. But it should not have taken so long to figure out that, in fact, we have a substantial amount of transmission that's asymptomatic.
It also brings us to why people should have been wearing masks earlier. They didn't know that they were spreading it.
Exactly. And that's the reason why back in January and February we were saying we're not so sure you really need masks, because we didn't realize at the time that there was being asymptomatic spread. As soon as that became clear, there was no doubt you should be wearing a mask.
I point some of these specific things out because they're not political. These were public health mistakes. That's almost scarier.
Well, I think to defend the CDC, if I could for a moment, is that one can say something is a mistake because you know now data now that you didn't know then.
Why aren't we having a national conversation about what went wrong? I mean, apart from this room right now, why isn't there a 9/11 type commission?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is that you are going to see that. For sure, Margaret. I think the lack of doing that now is because you're focusing on getting this thing under control. I would be astounded if we didn't have a very serious look at what went right, what went wrong.
But you want one.
Oh, I absolutely want one.
You were quoted as saying it was the worst possible decision for the Trump administration to have left things up to the states.
Yeah.
Where do you rank that?
I rank that right there, maybe a little bit below some of the things you're talking about, but way up there. People always ask, if you had the magic wand and did things exactly the way you wanted, what it would be. One of them would be, if ever, there was a situation where you needed a synergistic, uniform, well-thought-out approach, is when you're dealing with a common enemy of a virus that is a global pandemic, the likes of which we haven't seen in 100 years. To be able to say, if I don't really want to do this because I want, my own opinion of what it's going to be with this state versus this state versus this state, to me, that's one of the antitheses of public health. How could you possibly have a situation where one state says, oh, I'm sorry, and you shouldn't be wearing a mask? In fact, you have executive orders saying you shouldn't be wearing a mask. You have another
Florida.
state that does not want to get vaccinated because they think it's a political statement to get vaccinated or not. The divisiveness in this country, to me, is the biggest mistake that supersedes everything that we're talking about. I mean, when we look back historically and look back at this and said, we had this devastating plague out there that were killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, and we're having public health principles being decided on the basis of political ideology.
Public health is often politicized, though. I mean, you know that so well from your experience with AIDS. What was the chief lesson you brought into dealing with COVID from that experience with AIDS?
Never underestimate infectious disease outbreak because it can be insidious, the way AIDS was. You learn also to pay attention to what's going on in the community. And that's the major lesson I learned. You don't do it from above and dictate down.
Was that happening at all in China when this first appeared, going back to the fall of 2019?
It was very tough what was going on in China. It's kind of opaque. Clearly there was infection that was percolating, as early as November, maybe even earlier. You had an infection that emerged almost certainly out of animal reservoir. The more you study bats there, the more you see how close some of the viruses are to SARS-CoV-2. So it was assumed in the beginning, well, this is the coronavirus. Why isn't it just assumed that it's SARS-CoV-1, which means it doesn't transmit very well and it's going to get controlled by public health measures, which is exactly what happened with SARS-CoV-1. Then you find out that even though it's SARS-CoV-2, it is a very, very different virus than SARS-CoV-1 because A, it is transmitted spectacularly efficiently from person to person, and B, most of it is about 40 to 50 to 60% is asymptomatic.
Why is it so efficient?
Well, it evolves in animals, it evolves in humans, and it could just, sometimes viruses jump into humans and they take off and run right away.
But we don't know what went between the bat and the human. There was something in between?
Yeah, it was very likely a host. What the Chinese did, I don't have firsthand knowledge of that, but the people who were reporting it, who investigated, what they did is they cleaned out the markets as soon as it turned out that it was clear that there were clusters coming from the market, which, in typical fashion, I think, trying to make sure that things don't get pointed to them, they probably got rid of the animals that were the intermediary hosts there.
Beijing acknowledges now that they don't think it originated in that market.
Well, it may not have originated in the market, but it certainly could have.
Well, there were clusters that may have been picked up and transmitted, as I understand it, through the market, but the place of origin was not within the market itself.
No, I don't think you could say that. I think you could say we don't know how and where it originated.
When was the first time that you heard that there was some strange pneumonia?
I think it was the very last day. It may have been December the 31st or the 30th or 1st of January.
When they informed the World Health Organization?
Yeah, I mean, I got a call from Bob Redfield who said, I just heard from colleagues in China that there's a unusual pneumonia among people there that has been detected. So we just got to stay heads up for that. And then a few days later, I think it was January 9th or 10th, the sequence came out. As soon as I heard there was a new pneumonia, I said, well, a new pneumonia, Wuhan, wet market, almost certainly it's going to be a coronavirus. And that's when I got my team organized immediately and said, as soon as we get that sequence of what it is, let's go after that vaccine. Let's plug it into mRNA. We were already collaborating with Moderna with mRNA, and let's do it. And it was rocket speed. About 5-6 days later, we were starting with the vaccine development with Moderna. 65 days later, we did a phase 1 trial, and multiple months later, we knew we had a safe and effective vaccine.
That's incredible speed that
Yeah.
you were already there. But it was despite the lack of information being shared.
All I needed was the sequence. I mean, the public health part was handled by the CDC.
Live virus samples wouldn't have made a difference for you.
I didn't need it at all. I just needed the sequence to get a vaccine.
We'll be back in a moment with more from Dr. Fauci. Towards the end of our conversation with Dr. Fauci, we asked him about whether there should be tougher global regulations put in place for labs that deal with highly contagious viruses. He brought up legislation sponsored by Republicans that would limit U.S. government support for gain-of-function research, in which experts modify viruses to better understand them. There has been speculation that a lab accident led to the spread of COVID. Dr. Fauci said there are already strict guardrails in place that the public doesn't fully appreciate. This is a political football right now.
Oh, it is a total political football. Total.
And you take the fire specifically for this.
I do. All the time.
There's a congressional act with your name on it.
Yes.
Literally.
Exactly. And it's just a lot of, well, anyway.
Finish the thought.
No, there's a lot of politicization of that. And I think there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and outright lies about that. And that's really unfortunate.
You're angry about it.
It's painful and disturbing to see when you're trying to focus all of your attention on doing what you can do, the way we did to create the vaccines, to develop the drugs, to save millions of lives. And then you have this completely outlandish politicization of it.
2 Washington Post reporters said that back in July of 2020, you had been speaking to your wife about resigning.
I never spoke to my wife ever about resigning. They got that wrong. I never even considered for a moment of resigning.
Why do you feel so strongly about that, about staying on the job when you become, I mean, you were personally, not just rhetorically, threatened? Your security, your safety, your family.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that?
I dealt with it by focusing on what my job is. From the time that I went into medicine to the right now where I am at my age, my job has been totally focused on doing what I can with the talents and the influence I have to make scientific advances to protect the health of the American public. So anybody who spends lies and threatens and all that theater that goes on with some of the investigations and the congressional committees and the Rand Pauls and all that other nonsense, that's noise, Margaret. That's noise. I know what my job is.
Senator Cruz told the Attorney General you should be prosecuted.
Yeah. I'd have to laugh at that. I should be prosecuted. What happened on January 6th, Senator?
Do you think that this is about making you a scapegoat to deflect
from
President Trump?
Of course. You have to be asleep not to figure that one out.
Well, there are a lot of Republican senators taking aim at this. I mean,
that's okay. I'm just going to do my job. And I'm going to be saving lives, and they're going to be lying.
It seems another layer of danger to play politics around matters of life and death.
Exactly. Exactly. And to me, that's unbelievably bad, because all I want to do is save people's lives. I mean, anybody who's looking at this carefully realizes that there's a distinct anti-science flavor to this. So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, so it's easy to criticize. But they're really criticizing science, because I represent science. That's dangerous. To me, that's more dangerous than the slings and the arrows that get thrown at me. And if you damage science, you are doing something very detrimental to society long after I leave.
Is there a playbook that you are handing over to the next person right behind you at the NIH when that retirement day does come?
Yeah, the playbook for them is to do what I'm doing now. Focus on what your goal is. And your goal is to end an outbreak by what you have at your disposal. And what we have at our disposal is science. If you get caught up in this nonsense of politicization, you're not going to be able to do your job as well.
In this playbook you're handing off to your future successor, do you say the next pandemic comes at us faster?
You know, I think we likely will, though you can't predict. You know, I've been through multiple emergences of diseases. Some have been one-off, trivial. But I think the idea of the human-animal interface is something that we've really got to address that. You know, that's the reason why I get back to the fact of these wet markets that bring in animals that are next to bats in caves in wherever, who knows, all in Southeast Asia and China.
You want more regulation of this internationally?
I want that to be regulated. I really, really do. And we know the Chinese were trying to regulate that, but there were people who were breaking the law, and there is good documentation from people who photographed that animals that were not supposed to be brought in from the wild into the wet markets were there. And I think that's the reason why, when this happened, I don't know, but I think, why the Chinese just completely cleaned it out. I think that is one of the reasons why we're not able to find out what the original source was. I think they've destroyed some of the evidence.
We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.